Yeah, so I think Corey asked me to talk here because we've been doing a lot of experimentation over the last year and a half, and the ways that we distribute, prioritize, and track work across GlobalNOC and Internet2. So for those of you that don't know me, Chris Robb, I've been here for 20, 21 years now, and I'm currently manage the set of engineers, network engineers that support the Internet2 network. So I'll be scoping this just to that group, although some of these concepts are applied in our systems team. The service desk has a little bit of an insight into some of the stuff, and I'll highlight that as we, excuse me, as we go. So real quick, just to kind of lay out the problem set, I just want to talk about the resources that we have that we want to talk about coordinating. So I already talked about the team that I manage, which is the GlobalNOC set of engineers. There's also a team of network engineers at Internet2. We do have a unified engineering team structure that kind of brings those two together, but they are definitely different kind of organizationally managed units. There's network leadership at Internet2, so this would be people like Rob Vitsky, Linda Roos, George Loftus, Christian Todorov, the set of folks that largely set our direction and our priorities for what they want the Internet2 network to be. We have the service desk, we have systems engineering, we have users and customers and partners. So this would be like vendor partners like Sienna, and then just kind of garden variety vendors that we don't have a strong partnership with. So those are the set of people that we want to be able to kind of provide services to and coordinate across and track against. So in terms of demands, I know this is probably going to be very familiar to a lot of you. There is a lot of work to get done. We have some differentiation in terms of priority of which work is more urgent than some other work. We have to ensure delivery. We need to be able to try to track and communicate status to the stakeholders. The quality of the work needs to be up to snuff. Like, we can't just deliver things that are kind of half-baked. We have to work within the set of resources that we have. We don't have unlimited resources, and we really want staff to be happy. Generally, a happy staffer is a productive and staffer and good contributor. We really break things down into kind of two batches of things at its core. At the high level, we have incidents, and those are all tracked in the ticketing system. For us, that's ServiceNow. I think for everybody else, I think that's true as well at the GlobalNOC. I think you're all fairly familiar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about incidents because I think many people kind of understand that, but those are effectively real-time issues that need to be addressed in the network. So a service outage, that sort of thing, something where we have a breakage or an imminent breakage of a service that is provided by the network. For everything else, we kind of throw those into this generic project category. And we track those in across 3 different systems. One is in ticketing. We still do some of this in ticketing. And again, that's in ServiceNow. And I want to pause right here for a second and say that in the past, we had kind of been doing both of these things in the ticketing system. So for those of you that have been here for a while, you'll remember the Footprints project. All of our projects and our incidents, they were all kind of mixed together. There was a little bit of differentiation in terms of how we typed those individual things, but they were all still using the same construct. Once we moved to ServiceNow, we realized that we can make some differentiation there. So we started moving some of that work into a Kanban system. The tool that we use is Kanbanize. I'll show it a little bit at the end here. For those of you that aren't familiar with Kanbanize, it's a very full-featured implementation of the Kanban methodology. A lot of people, their introduction to Kanban is Trello. And I guess I would say, like, if you had like an analogy, I would say Trello is kind of like the notepad on your computer, and Kanbanize is kind of like Microsoft Word, maybe with a little less bloat. But it's a much more full-featured and advanced implementation of that. And then we also use Agile Scrum using Smartsheet. And for those of you not familiar with Smartsheet, that's kind of like a souped-up version of Google Docs that has some additional filtering and scripting capabilities built into it. So these are the 3 ways that we track projects across those 3 different systems. And just zeroing in on that, the project that we have effectively 4 different project types. So we have standard projects, which are those that are under 30 minutes. These are like the really quick things that generally get sent our way. Like somebody asks us a question, we have like a prefix addition to make. There isn't a whole lot of advantage to tracking that in an outside system and pushing that through a Kanban board. We could do it that way, but we made a decision to kind of make a cutoff. Like if you're spending less than 30 minutes worth of effort on this, we don't really worry about tracking it in a different system. So we keep that within the ticketing system. There's no prioritization of that. It's just handled by the round robin engineer. And it's generally worked immediately within a day or within our standard response times. Above that, we have quick hits. So these are things between 30 minutes and 4 hours. We don't prioritize those, but we throw those onto the Kanban board, and they're just kind of thrown into a backlog, and engineers pick and grab from them as they choose. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. Above that, we have kind of standard projects, and these are the ones that are over 4 hours. These are the ones that Internet2 wants to have a stronger voice in helping prioritize. So anything that we think is going to take more than 4 hours worth of effort goes into a prioritization system that Internet2 manages, and they tell us kind of the relative priority of that. This probably could use a little bit more work based on kind of where we're at today, but it's the theory is that Internet2 kind of has the voice in that. And that's tracked as a combination of some things are in the Kanban system and some things are in the Smartsheet Scrum system where we have kind of weekly sprint meetings. If it is on the Kanban board, the engineers, again, pull from that as they're able and they have cycles. And then the last category is continual service improvement. These are really internally sourced things. They can be any length. We prioritize them. We've kind of negotiated that into our arrangement with Internet2 that 10% of our time can be for things that are internal improvements. So this is things like cleaning up things in the database, changing process, documentation cleanup, those kinds of things that we notice along the way. And again, we track those in Kanban as well. We do have an escape for things that need to be done really quickly. We have this expedite ability for Internet2 to kind of signal to us this has to be done now. We haven't had the ability to plan for it because, say, a customer has an urgent need. We don't like that lever to be pulled very often, so we kind of separate it out so that there's maybe a bigger uplift. We were finding that we were getting a lot of real urgent last-minute requests, and this has really cut down on that. Just by virtue of putting it in a separate category and calling it something else, people have been much more intentional about bringing things to us and giving us time to prepare for those types of things and to have conversations about prioritizing them. So just real quick, the Agile Scrum intake, we use this largely for projects related to the next generation infrastructure project, but that's kind of a blurry barrier. So don't get too hung up on that, but effectively it's a 2 to 3 week sprint planning process. Generally, the week before the sprint part starts on Wednesday, Internet2 management kind of throws everything they want to get done in the next sprint into this kind of brainstorming document. So like if I'm Paul and I have a bunch of security projects, I just throw them all in this document. I don't necessarily care about how much time it's going to take. I just want to say I want to get it done. On Thursday, we all get together and we find out where we've overcommitted someone. So like if Mark Brochu, for example, is an Internet2 engineer, if we've asked for 150% of his time, it comes out in that conversation, and we have a conversation about what can be moved around. Can somebody else take this? Can we push this off to the next sprint? Does it really need to take that much time? That's where we have that conversation. And then Friday is when we close out the current sprint, and then we make last minute adjustments based on things that didn't get done in that sprint, which hopefully is not much. And we send that off and have a sprint launch meeting on Monday, which is when the engineers all kind of get their task list for the next week. The Kanban system, I know this is like way too detailed for a lot of people to see, and these will be sent out. So I just put it here, so if you want to zoom in onto it, it's easy to read it. But this is what the Kanban board design looks like for us. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see. Can you guys see my mouse? Yes. So we don't really use the backlog that much. This is a feature that we generally track a lot of our backlog items in ServiceNow. These are items that are available to work. So this is like, once we've activated something and said this is going to be done, the timer starts for that item, meaning that We've committed to do it, and it is now being considered an active project, and our metrics will be impacted by how long it sits on the board. So once it gets into this area, that's basically where the engineers pull from when they've got cycle to work on things. So this is the in progress area. So this is where things sit while they're being worked, and they move around a little bit. I'm not going to get into too many details on the design of the board itself, but effectively this is like where the active set of projects are. The really important thing to take away from this whole thing here is that we have limits on each of these. So for example, we have a limit of 18 active projects at any given point. We try very, very hard not to violate that limit. If it does, we have to have a good reason for it, like an expedite or something like that. What that does is it constrains our focus onto our projects as they're moving through and keeps us focused on getting them through as quickly as possible. And then once they're finished, they're moved over to done, which frees up space here and allows us to pull from over the requested area. So the Kanban process is pretty straightforward. Engineers get to select the work. The amount we have is limited. I talked about that. We have daily stand-ups every morning at 9:30 to talk about what everybody's working on, where they're blocked, that sort of thing. That is a really critical aspect to all of this. If anybody implements this sort of system, I would highly, highly recommend having a daily stand-up, whether it's in the morning or the evening. I don't think it matters, or afternoon. I don't think it matters too much. But just make sure you have a regular check-in. Again, we're really kind of emphasizing pushing things through the board as soon as we can. So Corey, how am I doing on time?
Got a couple of minutes, about 4. We do have a question from Adam
Great.
Nemeth. He said, how do you manage customer response times? Does this change SLAs? And then does daily stand-up answer that? So I think there are 3 questions there.
Yeah, so we have the ability to add a due date to a card if we want to. So things like anything that like Linda Roos brings us, where she's told a customer, 90 days, you'll get this. We put that on the card and we prioritize that. The engineers take that into account when they select a card that's on the board, so they can see that one's actually due. Maybe I'll take that one as opposed to one that's been sitting a little bit longer. That all kind of factors into all of that. The good news is that, so one of the things that a question we get from Linda all the time is, how long will this take? And because we have experience pushing these types of cards through, we actually have a good set of metrics on how long it takes to do a particular type of task, like a new customer turnup. So we can say 85% of the time, we finish this within 3 weeks. And she kind of crafts that into her response back to the customer, can craft that response back to them. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Adam?
Yeah, it does. It kind of seemed when you were going through it, maybe I misunderstand it a little bit, as though like tickets that weren't actual outages, break fixes, go into this other process, right? So if it was going to take more than 30 minutes, and what we would term on our side is like a normal ticket, but it would go to a project side. So I'm just kind of wondering, because like for us, like right normal, we have maybe like 3 days to answer. High, we have less, and so it's kind of a different thought process, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that does come into play sometimes. If it's something that gets thrown into the backlog, generally we activate those really quickly. So if it's customer facing and there's somebody waiting on us, those get prioritized and moved into the system faster, so we don't have those kinds of lags. There isn't a really formal process for it, but it ends up not being a problem because of that.
Interesting.
So real briefly, this is just what the board looks like. This is live data, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but this is specific to the Kanbanized tool. The really nice thing here is you've got a lot of analytics, and you've got dashboards that you can create. You can look at a heat map to see where things are getting stuck in the process. You can see that like our average time in this hard blocked column for quick hits is 18 days. Why is that? You can pull up, flow data to see you're throwing things into the system. So like if I were to look at the last 3 months of flow data, you can see the amount of work coming into the system is steadily going up. The blue area here in the bottom are things that have been completed. What you really want to look at is the area between each of these different colors here, which represents different states of cards. Is it getting smaller or bigger? And you can see the blue area. I won't mouse over it because it gets kind of covered, but the blue area starts getting smaller. And that's because those were hard blocked things, and we made a very intentional process change to not use that column as much because people were stashing things in there. So it very easily visualizes, you know, that we've had a lot less things that have just been sitting there stuck on blocked issues. We've been very aggressive about making sure that we don't have those sorts of blocks. So it's a good visual way to see like how we're doing productivity wise. People have been asking us, you know, have there been COVID related slowdowns? And I pull this up and really there aren't. If you look at the data for the last month, nothing's actually getting bigger. In fact, some areas are actually getting smaller. So it's been interesting. We've been doing a lot more internal documentation projects because we've had less externally sourced work, and that's why that little yellow area there is getting a little bit bigger. So it's very easy for me to pull up all sorts of analytics on how we work. It's a highly customizable tool, and I definitely would recommend it if you're thinking of going down the Kanban path. So I think I've exhausted my time, but I'm happy to answer questions either here or offline.
I think there's a question that got cut off. Did anyone have a question? All right, let us know if you do have questions or you want to learn more. I find this topic very interesting myself, and so I like to talk with Chris about it. So we'll be glad to set something up if there's more detail or you guys want to know. One of the topics we get a lot is how do you implement this? And so that's one of the things we've got slated for ourselves to talk about internally. But yeah,